Room 6, 1-6, written by Douglas Taylor. Room 6, 1-6, a novel. The path is neither straight nor clear, but it always leads to where we're meant to be, whether we know it or not. Prologue. Claire Anderson had always been drawn to structure and purpose. Even as a child, she found comfort in order, alphabetizing her bookshelf, color-coding her notes, creating elaborate schedules for her summer days. Her teachers praised her discipline. Her parents marveled at her focus. She was, everyone agreed, going places. But there had been one exception, one thing she'd done purely for love, without any plan for where it might lead. The cello. She'd started at 8 after hearing a street musician in the park playing something slow and mournful that made her stop walking and simply stand there, tears streaming down her face for reasons she couldn't explain. Her mother had to pull her away, promising they'd find out what instrument made that sound, promising they'd get her lessons. By 16, Claire was serious, conservatory serious, her teacher said. There was talk of Juilliard, of auditions, of a life built around music. She practiced for hours every day, the low voice of the instrument resonating through the floorboards of their small house, filling every room with something that felt, to her, like prayer. Her younger sister Margaret would sit outside the door during practice sessions, her back against the wall, knees drawn up to her chest. "Play the sad one," she'd whisper through the crack beneath the door, "the one that sounds like the ocean." Claire always played it for her, the Bach cello suite that opened with 3 short notes and 2 long ones, a rhythm that seemed to capture everything beautiful and heartbreaking about being alive. Margaret said it sounded like waves, not the crashing kind, but the gentle kind that pull at the shore, always reaching, never quite holding on. Those were good years, the cello years. Claire would look back on them later and realize she had never been happier, though she hadn't known it at the time. She'd been too focused on improving, on practicing, on moving toward some imagined future where she stood on a stage and moved audiences the way that street musician had moved her. But somewhere between 16 and 18, Claire made a calculation. She was good. Everyone said so. But good wasn't enough for Juilliard. You had to be extraordinary. And even if she got in, even if she graduated, even if she somehow beat the impossible odds and carved out a career as a professional cellist, what then? A life of uncertainty. Auditions that might not pan out, teaching jobs that barely covered rent, the constant hustle of freelancing, of hoping the phone would ring. She looked at the numbers, she made a spreadsheet. She calculated the probability of success against the probability of failure, and the numbers didn't lie. Music was beautiful, but it wasn't practical. She chose business school instead. The conversation with her parents was brief and logical. She'd prepared talking points, charts showing average salaries, statistics on employment rates. They listened, nodded, said they supported whatever decision she made. They looked relieved, and she pretended not to notice. The conversation with Margaret was harder. "You're quitting?" Her sister stared at her across the kitchen table, a half-eaten bowl of cereal forgotten in front of her. Margaret was 14 then, still young enough to believe that dreams were things you chased, not calculated. "I'm being realistic." "You're being a coward." The word landed like a slap. Claire felt her face flush. "You don't understand." "I understand that you're scared. I understand that you'd rather do something safe than something real." Margaret pushed back from the table, her chair scraping against the linoleum. "I thought you were different. I thought you actually believed in something." "I believe in having a future." "No, you believe in not failing." Margaret's voice cracked. "That's not the same thing." She stormed out. Claire sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time, listening to the silence where music used to be. The cello went into a closet first, then storage during the move to college, and finally, after one relocation too many, into someone else's hands at an estate sale. Claire told herself she didn't miss it, told herself the ache she sometimes felt hearing a symphony on the radio was just nostalgia, the phantom pain of an amputated limb, nothing more. Margaret never quite forgave her. They stayed in touch through college, through Claire's MBA, through the early years of her career. But something had shifted between them. The easy intimacy they'd shared as children was gone, replaced by polite phone calls and awkward holiday visits. Margaret became a social worker, then a therapist, dedicating her life to helping people find meaning in their pain. Claire suspected this was a pointed commentary on her own choices, though Margaret never said so directly. The final break came 4 years ago. A fight about something petty. Claire couldn't even remember what had started it. A comment about their mother's birthday gift, maybe, or a perceived slight about Margaret's boyfriend. It didn't matter. Whatever the spark was, it ignited everything they'd never said to each other. "You threw it away," Margaret had shouted through the phone. "You had something real, something beautiful, and you threw it away for spreadsheets." "You're still angry about that? It was 15 years ago." "I'm angry that you've never been honest about it. You've never admitted that you made a mistake. You've never let yourself feel anything about losing the only thing that ever made you human." "That's not fair." "No, what's not fair is watching my sister turn into a robot. What's not fair is knowing you're miserable and watching you pretend you're not. What's not fair is—" Margaret's voice broke. "I miss you, Claire, the real you, the one who used to play music that made me cry, the one who felt things. Where did she go?" Claire's chest was tight, her eyes burned. She felt the words rising in her throat. "I miss her too. I don't know what happened. I'm so sorry." But she couldn't say them. The walls she'd built were too high, too thick. She'd spent too many years being the composed one, the practical one, the one who had her life together. "I don't know what you want from me," she said instead. Her voice was cold, professional, dead. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "I guess I don't either. Not anymore." She hung up. Claire waited for her to call back. She waited for a text, an email, some sign that Margaret was ready to talk again. But the silence stretched on. Days, then weeks, then months. And Claire was too proud to reach out first, too afraid of what she might have to admit if she did. The silence between them calcified into permanence. After that, Claire threw herself into her career with a ferocity that frightened even her. A top consulting firm, late nights analyzing failing companies, early mornings pitching solutions to skeptical executives. She became known for her work ethic, her attention to detail, her ability to fix anything. Promotions came quickly. Bonuses accumulated in accounts she rarely checked. Accolades lined the walls of the corner office she'd worked so hard to earn. Everything confirmed she was on the right path. But as her career ascended, the rest of her life faded into background noise. Her social circle dwindled to work colleagues who talked about nothing but work. Her apartment became a place to sleep between projects, its bare walls a testament to a life unlived. She dated occasionally, but the relationships never lasted. She was too busy, too guarded, too unwilling to let anyone pass the carefully constructed surface. And somewhere along the way, without realizing it, she developed a habit. When she was thinking, puzzling through a problem, waiting for a conference call to start, staring at numbers that wouldn't quite add up, her pen would tap against the desk. A specific rhythm, 3 short taps, too long, 3 short, too long, 3 short, too long. She'd been doing it for years before someone pointed it out. "Catchy tune," a colleague said once, nodding at her tapping pen. "What is it?" Claire looked down at her hand, startled. She hadn't realized she was doing it. "I don't know," she said. "Just a habit, I guess." But that night, alone in her apartment, she sat at her kitchen table and tapped the rhythm on the surface. 3 short, too long. 3 short, too long. The Bach cello suite, the one that sounded like the ocean, the one she used to play for Margaret. She set the pen down carefully and poured herself a glass of wine and did not think about what it meant. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. She told herself another project would fix it, another promotion. Surely, but no project did. The unease lingered, a faint but growing presence, like a whisper just out of reach. She was 43 years old. She had everything she'd worked for, and she had never felt more hollow. One night, after a particularly grueling day of meetings that had solved nothing, Claire found herself stepping out onto the small balcony adjoining her office. It was late, well past midnight, and the city stretched endlessly below, its lights glittering like a galaxy of small, cold stars. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain. She leaned against the railing and let the sounds of the city wash over her. Distant traffic, the occasional wail of a siren, the deep hum of a world that never stopped moving. She thought about Margaret, about the cello, about the life she'd carefully avoided living. What would it have been like? To have followed the music instead of the spreadsheets? To have risked failure for the chance at something real? She would never know now. That door had closed long ago, and she'd been the one to close it. Her gaze drifted across the vast expanse, the buildings stretching toward a horizon that seemed impossibly far, the sky above dark and endless. The world felt impossibly still, as though it had paused just for her. The city seemed vast, beautiful, and utterly indifferent. A strange calm washed over her. She thought about calling Margaret, right now, tonight, apologizing for everything, telling her the truth, that she missed her, that she'd made a mistake, that she was sorry. It wasn't too late. It couldn't be too late. But even as she thought it, she knew she wouldn't do it. The wall was too high, the silence had gone on too long, and she was too tired to fight anymore. Something was shifting. She could feel it, something inevitable. Her gaze lingered on the horizon, where the faintest glow of dawn was beginning to creep in, and she realized, with a clarity that startled her, that her life was about to change. How or why, she couldn't say. But as she stood there, suspended between earth and sky, she knew with unsettling certainty that nothing would ever be the same. The rest of the night dissolved into silence, the kind of silence that follows when something ends, though she couldn't have said what. Somewhere below, sirens wailed and faded, the way they always did in this city that never slept. The sound was familiar, almost comforting, blending into the ambient hum of traffic and distant voices. Claire stood there until the dawn light crept across the sky, feeling strangely at peace. And then everything was quiet. Part 1. The Arrival. Chapter 1. The Inheritance. The phone call came on a Monday morning. Claire was reaching for her coffee, the third cup of the day, though it was barely 9 o'clock, when her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. Unknown caller. She almost let it go to voicemail. Unknown callers were usually sales calls, wrong numbers, or automated messages about extended warranties she didn't need. But something made her answer. Later, she would wonder if it was fate, or instinct, or simply the exhaustion of another morning in a life that felt increasingly like a cage. "Hello? Miss Anderson?" The voice on the other end was polished, professional, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who wore three-piece suits and billed by the hour. "This is Thomas Crawford, attorney for the estate of your late uncle, Peter Gates." Claire set down her coffee. The name hit her like cold water. Peter Gates. She hadn't thought about him in years. He was her mother's brother, a distant figure in family stories and faded photographs. She remembered meeting him once, maybe twice, when she was very young. A tall man with kind eyes and a quiet voice who'd given her a snow globe from some coastal town she'd never heard of. "Uncle Peter is dead?" "He passed 3 weeks ago, I'm afraid. Peacefully in his sleep." A brief pause. I apologize that it's taken this long to reach you. Your uncle was somewhat reclusive. It took some time to locate his surviving relatives. I barely knew him. Claire wasn't sure why she said it. It felt important to establish somehow, to clarify that she wasn't grieving, wasn't expecting anything. Nevertheless, you are his sole heir. I'm sorry. What? Your uncle left his entire estate to you, Miss Anderson, specifically an old boutique hotel in Windfield, the Gates Hotel. It's been in your family for 3 generations. Claire stared at her office wall. A hotel, in a town she'd never heard of, left to her by an uncle she couldn't remember. There must be some mistake. No mistake, I assure you. Your uncle was quite adamant in his wishes. I have the will here in front of me. To my niece, Claire Elizabeth Anderson, I leave the Gates Hotel and all its contents, in the hope that she will find there what she's been looking for. What I've been looking for? Claire repeated. I'm not looking for anything. I'm only reading what's written. Crawford's voice was carefully neutral. I would advise visiting the property at your earliest convenience. There are papers to sign, and the hotel has been operating in a limited capacity since your uncle's passing. The staff will need direction. Staff? A small team, 2 permanent residents who've been maintaining the property. They're eager to meet you. Claire's mind was spinning. She had meetings this afternoon, a presentation on Thursday, a career that demanded every waking moment. And yet, there was something in the lawyer's words that nagged at her, in the hope that she will find there what she's been looking for. What did Peter Gates know about what she was looking for? They'd barely spoken. Her pen tapped against the desk, 3 short, 2 long. I'll need to rearrange some things, she heard herself say, but I can be there this week. Excellent. I'll send you the details. And Miss Anderson? Yes? A pause. The hotel is a special place. Your uncle believed that very strongly. Whatever you decide to do with it, I hope you'll give it a chance first. The line went dead. Claire sat in her office for a long time, staring at her phone. Outside, the city hummed with its usual energy, cars honking, people rushing, a world that never stopped moving. But inside, something had shifted. For the first time in years, she felt something that might have been curiosity, or might have been fate reaching out its hand. Chapter 2. Windfield. The train ride to Windfield was longer than Claire expected. She'd taken the early morning departure from Grand Central, settling into a window seat with her laptop open and a stack of reports she intended to review. Work didn't stop just because she was chasing down an unexpected inheritance. She'd made that clear to her team, to her clients, to herself. But somewhere outside the city, as the skyscrapers gave way to suburbs and the suburbs gave way to open country, Claire closed her laptop. She couldn't say why. The reports were important. The work was urgent. But the landscape rolling past her window, green fields dotted with farmhouses, forests blazing with autumn color, the occasional glimpse of a river winding through valleys, demanded her attention in a way she couldn't quite resist. When was the last time she'd looked at something without calculating its value? She didn't have an answer. The train car was mostly empty. A few scattered passengers, an elderly couple sharing a newspaper, a young mother with a sleeping toddler, a businessman in a rumpled suit who looked as exhausted as Claire felt. None of them seemed to notice the scenery. They were wrapped in their own worlds, their own concerns. Claire watched the countryside roll past and felt something loosen in her chest. She must have dozed because when she opened her eyes, the landscape had changed completely. Dense forest pressed against the windows, trees so thick their branches formed a canopy that blocked the sky. Through occasional gaps in the foliage, she caught glimpses of gray. The ocean, she realized. The train was hugging the coastline. Next stop, Windfield. The announcement crackled over the speaker, barely audible. Claire gathered her things, a single suitcase, her laptop bag, her coat, and made her way to the door. The platform was empty. She stepped off the train and looked around. A small station house, once painted white but now peeling to reveal gray wood beneath. A single bench, its slats weathered and worn. A clock on the wall that showed 3:47. No other passengers had disembarked with her. She looked back at the train. Through the windows, she could see the other passengers, the elderly couple, the young mother, the exhausted businessman. None of them were getting up. None of them were reaching for luggage or moving toward the doors. They didn't seem to know the train had stopped. As she watched, the doors closed. The train pulled away, gathering speed as it curved around a bend and disappeared into the forest. Within moments, the sound of its passage faded into silence. Claire stood alone on the platform. The clock on the wall still showed 3:47. Strange, she murmured, but the word felt inadequate somehow. This was more than strange. This was... Miss Anderson? She spun around. A taxi was idling in the small parking lot adjacent to the station. The driver, a heavy-set man with kind eyes and a weathered face, was already loading her suitcase into the trunk. "How did you—" She stopped. "I didn't call for a taxi." The man smiled. "The Gates Hotel, right?" "How did you know that?" He didn't answer, just held the back door open and waited. Claire hesitated. Every instinct honed by years in New York screamed at her to be cautious, to ask questions, to maintain control. But there was something about the driver's demeanor, unhurried, unsurprised, almost expectant, that made her questions feel unnecessary. She got in the car. The drive through Winfield was slow and strange. The town was quaint in the way that old photographs are quaint. Cobblestone streets lined with shops that looked unchanged for decades. A diner with hand-painted lettering in the window. A hardware store with rocking chairs on the porch. A white church steeple rising above the trees. But something was wrong with the people. Claire watched a woman sweeping the sidewalk outside the diner. She swept the same section of concrete, the same 3-foot stretch, over and over. The same motion, the same rhythm, never moving forward, never stopping. In the hardware store window, a man arranged cans on a shelf. He placed them in a precise pattern, stepped back to survey his work, then picked them all up and arranged them in exactly the same pattern again. A boy on a bicycle rode past the taxi, turned the corner, and 3 seconds later rode past again. The same boy, the same bicycle, the same motion. "Quiet town," Claire said, her voice carefully neutral. "Always has been," the driver replied. They passed through the center of town, and Claire's attention was caught by a figure on the corner. A man. Tall and still, dressed in a black suit that seemed utterly out of place in this sleepy, coastal village. He stood like a statue, perfectly motionless, and as the taxi passed, his dark eyes tracked Claire through the window. A chill ran down her spine, sharp and sudden and completely involuntary. She turned to look back. The corner was empty. "Who was that?" she asked. "The man in the black suit?" The driver glanced in the rearview mirror. His expression didn't change. Didn't see anyone. The road climbed after that, winding up a bluff that overlooked the ocean. Trees pressed close on either side, gnarled pines bent by decades of coastal wind. Through gaps in the foliage, Claire caught glimpses of gray water stretching to the horizon. And then, at the top of the bluff, she saw it. The Gates Hotel. Victorian architecture, sprawling and elegant, with a wraparound porch and tall windows that caught the afternoon light. White paint faded to gray, gardens overgrown with wild roses and seagrass. A widow's walk crowned the roofline, offering what must have been a spectacular view of the ocean. It should have looked abandoned. It should have looked neglected, forgotten, left to decay. But as Claire stared at it through the taxi window, she felt something else entirely. Recognition. The taxi stopped in front of the main entrance. The driver loaded her bags onto the porch, but wouldn't step past the first stair. "You're not coming in?" Claire asked. "My job's done." He was already back in the car, hand on the gear shift. "Good luck, Miss Anderson." The taxi pulled away before she could respond. Claire stood alone on the porch, the salt wind tugging at her hair. The hotel loomed above her, its windows dark, its silence absolute. She had never been here before, so why did it feel like coming home? Chapter 3. The Welcome. The front door opened before Claire could knock. A woman stood in the doorway, silver hair pinned in a loose bun, eyes that crinkled at the corners in a way that might have been warm. She wore a cardigan the color of autumn leaves, and her posture had the patient stillness of someone who had been waiting for a very long time. "You must be Claire." The woman's voice was pleasant, measured. "I'm Marjorie Collins. I manage the hotel." Her handshake was firm, her smile was practiced, but there was something in her eyes, an assessment, a measuring that made Claire feel like a specimen under a microscope. "Welcome to the gates." "Thank you." Claire stepped into the lobby, her heels clicking on hardwood floors that gleamed with polish. "How long have you worked here?" A pause, almost imperceptible. "Long enough," Marjorie said. The lobby was grand in the way that old things are grand. Dark wood paneling, a sweeping staircase, tall windows letting in soft coastal light. A chandelier hung from the ceiling, its crystals catching the afternoon sun and scattering rainbows across the walls. Fresh flowers sat in a vase on the front desk, white lilies, their scent heavy and sweet. "The flowers are beautiful," Claire said. "Is there a florist in town?" "I grow them myself, in the greenhouse out back." "I didn't see a greenhouse." Marjorie's smile didn't waver. "It's around the side, easy to miss if you're not looking for it." Claire let it go. She was tired from the journey, unsettled by the strangeness of the town, and not in the mood for mysteries. And then she heard it. Music, faint and far away, but unmistakable. Piano, a melody she almost recognized. Something classical, melancholic, that tugged at a memory just out of reach. "Is someone playing?" Marjorie tilted her head. "Playing?" "The piano. I hear—" Claire stopped. The music had faded, dissolving into silence as suddenly as it had appeared. "Never mind. I'm tired from the trip." Marjorie watched her for a moment, that assessing look again, like she was checking something off a list. "Your uncle loved this place," she said finally. "He spent his final years trying to understand it." Understand it? Every old building has stories. The Gates has more than most. She paused at the foot of the stairs. "I should tell you about room 616. The number hung between them like a held breath. "What about it?" "It's on the 6th floor, corner room, overlooking the ocean. Your uncle was particularly interested in it." Marjorie's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in her voice. "The room has been closed since his passing." "Why?" "Some rooms aren't ready for guests." She didn't elaborate. Claire waited, but no further explanation came. "I'll want to see it," Claire said. "Eventually." "Of course, when you're ready." They climbed the staircase together, Marjorie pointing out features as they went. The original banister, hand-carved in 1892, the stained glass window on the landing, depicting a ship on stormy seas, the series of photographs lining the third-floor hallway, showing the hotel through the decades. The music started again as they reached the 2nd floor. A Bach cello suite, Claire recognized it immediately, transposed for piano. The same piece she used to play for Margaret all those years ago. The one that sounded like the ocean. Marjorie gave no sign of hearing it. On the 3rd-floor landing, Claire glanced down a long corridor. At the far end, a figure stood facing the wall. "Who's that?" Marjorie didn't look. "We have other guests. They keep to themselves. They're facing the wall. Some guests prefer solitude." When Claire looked again, the corridor was empty. No figure, no movement, just the long stretch of carpet and the closed doors on either side. Her room was on the 4th floor, comfortable, tastefully decorated, with a window overlooking the overgrown gardens and the ocean beyond. Marjorie left her to settle in, promising dinner at 7 in the small dining room off the lobby. Claire unpacked slowly, her mind churning. The strange town with its looping residents, the taxi driver who knew her name, the figure in the black suit who vanished, the music she heard that no one else seemed to notice. And room 616, closed since her uncle's death. She walked to the window and looked out at the ocean. Gray waves rolled toward a gray shore beneath a gray sky. The view should have been melancholy. Instead, it felt peaceful. Like the world had paused just for a moment to let her breathe. Her pen was in her hand. She didn't remember picking it up. It tapped against the windowsill. 3 short, 2 long. 3 short, 2 long. The body remembers. She set the pen down and went to find dinner. Chapter 4. The Historian. Max Turner was in the library the next morning when Claire came looking for answers. The library was a small room off the main lobby, walls lined with books that looked older than the hotel itself, leather armchairs arranged around a cold fireplace, tall windows overlooking the sea. It smelled of old paper and wood polish and something else, something Claire couldn't quite identify, like salt, but sweeter, like flowers left to dry. Max stood by the window with a cup of coffee silhouetted against the gray morning light. He was mid-40s, tall and lean, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from spending time outdoors. His clothes were casual, flannel shirt, worn jeans, but there was something precise about the way he held himself, alert, watchful. He turned as she entered. "You must be Claire." His handshake was warm, his smile easy. "I was a friend of your uncle's. I'm the unofficial historian of just about everything around here." Historian? The town, the hotel, the families who built them. I've spent years researching the area's history. He gestured to the books lining the walls. "Your uncle left quite a collection, first-hand accounts going back to the hotel's founding." Claire settled into one of the armchairs. She hadn't slept well. The bed was comfortable enough, but she'd kept waking throughout the night, convinced she heard footsteps in the hallway, voices whispering just below the threshold of understanding. Each time she'd gotten up to check, the corridor had been empty. "I want to ask you about room 616. Something flickered across Max's face, a shadow, quickly suppressed. "What about it?" "Marjorie said my uncle was interested in it, that it's been closed since he died. I want to know why." Max set down his coffee cup, considered his words carefully. "There have been incidents," he said finally, "going back decades." "What kind of incidents?" "Strange occurrences, guests who reported hearing things, seeing things, feelings of being watched." He paused. "And disappearances." "Disappearances?" Max was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "A young couple, 1962, James and Helen Abernathy. They checked in for a weekend. They never checked out." "What happened to them?" "No one knows. The police investigated. They found the Abernathy's belongings still in the room, their car still in the lot, but James and Helen were simply gone, as if they'd stepped into that room and vanished from the world." Claire's mouth was dry. "That's impossible. I'm just telling you what happened. And there's been nothing since? 60 years, and no one's figured out what happened to them?" "There have been other incidents, other guests who reported strange experiences after staying in that room, but nothing as dramatic as the Abernathys. Your uncle spent years researching their case. He was convinced there was an explanation. What did he find?" Max hesitated. "Your uncle believed the room was a threshold, a place where the membrane between states of being grows thin." "That's not an answer." "No," Max agreed. "It's not." He went back to his book, Claire noticed it was open to the same page she'd seen when she walked in. Either he was a very slow reader, or he hadn't been reading at all. "You said you were a friend of my uncle's," she said. "How long did you know him?" "A long time." "How long have you lived in Windfield?" A pause, almost imperceptible. "Long enough." Somewhere in the hotel, Claire heard the piano again. The Bach suite. 3 short notes, 2 long. "Do you hear that?" Max didn't look up. "There's no piano in the hotel, Claire. There hasn't been for 40 years. "Then what am I hearing?" He turned a page he hadn't read. "The hotel has its own music. You'll get used to it." She waited for him to say more. He didn't. Just sat there with his book, his eyes fixed on words she was increasingly certain he wasn't seeing. Claire stood. "Thank you for your time." "Claire." His voice stopped her at the door. "Your uncle was a good man. He cared about this place, about the people who came here." He finally looked up. "He would have wanted you to understand, but some understanding takes time." "I don't have time. I have a career in New York, a life." Something shifted in Max's expression, something that might have been pity. "Of course you do," he said quietly. She left him there in the library, surrounded by books that might hold answers she wasn't sure she wanted to find. The piano music followed her up the stairs. Chapter 5. The Departure. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. The bed was comfortable, soft sheets, thick pillows, a mattress that seemed to mold itself to her body. The room was quiet, the ocean outside providing a steady rhythm of waves against the shore. Everything about the space was designed for rest, but rest wouldn't come. She lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, listening to sounds that might or might not have been real. Footsteps in the hallway, soft, measured, stopping just outside her door before moving on. Whispers threading through the walls, words she couldn't quite make out. And beneath it all, the faint strains of piano music, playing a melody she knew by heart. At 2 a.m., she gave up. She sat on the edge of the bed and made a decision. This was ridiculous. She was a rational person, a professional, someone who solved problems for a living. And the solution to this particular problem was obvious. She needed to leave. She could come back in daylight with a team, assessors, contractors, maybe a real estate agent to evaluate the property. The hotel needed work. That much was clear, but it didn't need her to stay inside it. She could manage the renovation from New York, make occasional visits, maintain a safe distance from whatever strangeness was seeping through these walls. She packed her bag quickly, quietly, just to the essentials. She could send for the rest later. Her laptop, her phone, a change of clothes, the practical minimalism of a woman who had learned to travel light. The hallway was dark when she eased open her door. Emergency lighting cast a faint glow along the floor, just enough to see by. The other doors were closed, silent. No sign of Marjorie or Max or any of the mysterious guests who kept to themselves. She made her way to the staircase, moving carefully, testing each step before committing her weight. The old wood creaked occasionally, but not loudly enough to wake anyone. She hoped. The lobby was even darker than the hallway, a vast space of shadows and suggestion, the chandelier overhead reduced to a dim outline against the ceiling. Moonlight filtered through the tall windows, casting pale rectangles on the hardwood floor. Claire crossed to the front door. She reached for the handle. It didn't move. She tried again, gripping harder, twisting with more force. Nothing. The door was solid, immovable, as if it had been carved from a single block of stone. She looked for a lock, a deadbolt, a chain, anything that might explain why the door wouldn't open, but there was no visible mechanism, just smooth wood and an ornate brass handle that refused to turn. "That's impossible," she whispered. She moved to one of the windows, tried to push it open, painted shut, or stuck, or somehow sealed. She tried another window, same result. Fine. Back door, The kitchen was at the rear of the hotel, through a swinging door behind the front desk. Claire found it in the darkness, her hands running along walls she couldn't see, her feet testing unfamiliar floors. The space smelled of herbs and old grease and something sweeter. Flowers again, that heavy lily scent that seemed to follow her through the hotel. The back door was simpler than the front, a plain wooden door with a simple latch. Claire reached for it, half expecting the same resistance. It opened. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the salt-sharp scent of the ocean. Stars scattered across a sky so dark and clear it seemed impossible after years of New York's light pollution. The path to the road was visible in the moonlight, a pale ribbon winding through the overgrown garden. Claire stepped outside. For a moment, she just stood there, breathing. The relief was overwhelming, physical, almost dizzying. She was out. She could leave. Whatever strangeness had infected the hotel, whatever game Marjorie and Max were playing, she could walk away from all of it. She set off down the path. The garden was wilder than she'd realized. Rose bushes grown into tangled masses, hedges that had long since lost any formal shape, statuary choked with vines. A dry fountain stood at the center of what had once been a courtyard, its stone basin cracked and weathered. She passed through the iron gates at the edge of the property. They stood open, rust-frozen on their hinges, as if they hadn't been closed in years. Beyond them, the road stretched ahead, a pale thread through dark trees leading down the bluff toward town. Claire walked. Her footsteps were loud in the silence, the crunch of gravel, the rustle of her coat. Somewhere in the trees, an owl called. The ocean murmured in the distance, waves against rock, but otherwise the night was still. 5 minutes passed. 10. The road curved through the forest, the trees pressing close on either side. Claire walked faster, her bag bumping against her hip, her breath coming quick in the cold air. And then, ahead, she saw the gates. Iron gates, rust-frozen, standing open. Beyond them, an overgrown garden, a dry fountain with a cracked basin, rose bushes tangled into masses, and rising above it all, pale in the moonlight, the Gates Hotel. Claire stopped. She was breathing hard now, her heart pounding against her ribs. This was wrong. This was impossible. She had walked away from the hotel. She had been walking for at least 10 minutes, down the hill, toward town. She turned around. The road stretched behind her, pale and empty, curving into the forest. She could see her own footprints in the thin layer of dust. She started walking the other direction, faster this time, almost running. The road curved, the trees pressed close. The gates appeared ahead. The hotel waited. She tried again and again. Each direction, each path led back to the same place. The garden, the fountain, the gates, the hotel, patient and still. Watching her efforts with what she could only imagine was amusement. On the 5th attempt, Claire stopped in the middle of the road and screamed. The sound tore through the night, raw, primal, completely unlike anything that had ever come out of her careful, controlled throat. It echoed off the trees and faded into silence, and nothing answered. Nothing changed. She was trapped. Dawn found her sitting on the front porch steps, her bag at her feet, her body exhausted and cold. She had stopped trying sometime around 4 a.m. after her legs gave out and her voice went hoarse. Now she just sat, watching the sky lighten from black to gray to pale gold, feeling emptier than she had ever felt in her life. The front door opened behind her. "Breakfast is ready," Marjorie said. Her voice was pleasant, unhurried. "Whenever you're hungry." Claire didn't turn around. The roads lead back. They often do. You knew. You knew I'd try to leave, and you knew I couldn't. I knew you'd try. Everyone tries at first. Now Claire did turn. Marjorie stood in the doorway, her expression serene, her cardigan buttoned against the morning chill. "What is this place?" "It's a hotel, dear, just like it says on the sign. Hotels don't trap their guests. No? Marjorie smiled. Perhaps not the ones you're used to, but the Gates is a very old establishment. It has its own ways of doing things. I want to leave. Of course you do, and perhaps someday you will. Marjorie stepped aside, holding the door open. But for now, breakfast is getting cold. You should eat something. You look exhausted. Claire wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers, explanations, some rational account of what was happening. But her body was shutting down. The sleepless night, the hours of walking, the cold that had seeped into her bones. She picked up her bag and went inside. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. Chapter 6. The Developer. A week passed, or what felt like a week. Claire stopped trusting the calendar after the third morning. She'd circled October 15th in red pen, her arrival date according to the lawyer's documents, and woken the next day to find the date reading October 12th. The red circle was gone. She'd changed it again, watched the ink dry, locked the calendar in a drawer. The next morning's October 12th, red circle, absent. She stopped changing it after that. She also stopped trying to leave. 3 more nights of walking roads that led nowhere had convinced her that whatever force held her here was not going to yield to persistence. She would need a different approach, so she worked. If she couldn't escape, she could at least make herself useful. The hotel needed repairs. That much was obvious. Roof tiles missing, pipes that groaned, wallpaper peeling in the upper floors. She threw herself into assessment, making lists, taking photographs, treating the situation like what it was, a project management problem. It was easier than thinking about what was really happening, easier than facing the questions that multiplied every day. Lou Cipher appeared on the 7th night. Claire was in the library poring over her uncle's journal, a leather-bound book she'd found in his room, filled with cramped handwriting and strange diagrams. She'd been trying to decode his notes, looking for some explanation of the hotel's strangeness, some hint about what had happened to the Abernathys. She didn't hear the door open. One moment she was alone. The next, a figure stood by the fireplace, watching her with dark eyes. The man from the corner, the one who'd watched her taxi pass through town, the one who'd vanished when she looked back. He was tall and lean, dressed in a black suit that looked like it had been tailored in another century. His hair was dark, his features sharp, his skin pale in the firelight. Everything about him was precise, contained, carefully composed, and there was something wrong with his shadow. Claire noticed it immediately. The fire was burning brightly, casting long shadows across the room, but the space behind the man was oddly flat. No shadow stretched behind him. No silhouette marked his presence on the wall. Ms. Anderson. His voice was smooth, warm, the voice of a man who was used to being listened to. I hope I'm not disturbing you. How did you get in? Claire closed the journal, her fingers marking her place. The door was locked. Was it? I found it open. She was certain it hadn't been. I'm Lou Seifert. He moved to one of the armchairs and sat without waiting for invitation. I've been wanting to meet you, the new mistress of the Gates. I haven't decided if I'm staying. Haven't you? His smile was slight, knowing. It made Claire's skin prickle. I'm interested in why you're here, he said. What brought you to this particular hotel at this particular moment? I inherited it. My uncle died. Did you? He tilted his head. Inherit it, I mean. Or did you just arrive? I don't understand the question. No, not yet. He crossed his legs, utterly at ease. Places like this are mirrors, Claire. They show us the parts of ourselves we'd rather not see. Most people who come here are confused, frightened. They don't understand what's happening to them. And what is happening to them? That depends on the person. Some are just passing through. Others, he paused, others were always going to end up here, one way or another. You're not making sense. I'm making perfect sense. You're just not ready to hear it. He leaned forward, and Claire caught something in his eyes. Not malice, exactly, but hunger. Interest. The look of a collector examining a new acquisition. You walked in and started renovating, he said, making lists, taking photographs, treating the situation like a project management problem. The exact words she'd used in her own mind. Most people panic, most people try to escape, or they break down, or they refuse to accept what's happening. But you, his smile widened, you started optimizing. What are you? What do you think I am? Claire thought about his shadow, about the way he'd appeared in the locked library, about the sense of wrongness that radiated from him like heat from a fire. I think you're someone I shouldn't trust. Lou laughed, a genuine sound, surprised and delighted. Oh, I like you. I don't often meet interesting people anymore, but you... He stood, moving toward the door. You'll understand soon enough what you are, why you're here, what choices lie ahead of you. What situation? He paused at the door, turned back. Mirrors don't lie, Claire, no matter how much you might want them to. And then he was gone. The fire crackled. The room was silent. Claire sat alone, the journal heavy in her lap, her heart beating hard against her ribs. She looked at the spot where Lou had been standing, at the floor beneath the armchair where he'd sat, at the wall behind where he'd paused by the door. No shadow anywhere. He hadn't cast a shadow once. Chapter 7. The Wrongnesses. After Lou's visit, Claire threw herself into work with a desperation that bordered on mania. She cataloged every repair the hotel needed. She drafted renovation budgets, timeline estimates, staffing plans. She filled notebook after notebook with plans and calculations, as if sufficient organization might somehow force the world to make sense again. But the wrongnesses wouldn't stop. It started with the breakfast guest. A man in his 60s with a kind face and a gray cardigan sat at a table near the window every morning. Half-finished coffee, a newspaper he never seemed to read. He would nod at Claire when she came down, a polite acknowledgement between strangers. The first morning, she nodded back. The second morning, she noticed he was wearing the same cardigan, sitting at the same table, with the same half-finished coffee. The third morning, she stopped at his table. I'm Claire Anderson. I own the hotel. He smiled pleasantly. Lovely to meet you. Which room are you staying in? 412, 4th floor, corner. And how long will you be with us? I just arrived yesterday. You said that yesterday, too. The smile didn't waver. Did I? Claire went to the front desk, checked the registry. Room 412 had been empty for 2 weeks. When she turned back, his table was empty. Coffee cup gone. Newspaper vanished. The chair was pushed in neatly, as if no one had ever sat there. When she touched the seat cushion, it was cold. Not the residual warmth of someone who'd just left, but cold like it had been empty for hours. The radio was worse. Claire found an old transistor radio in the kitchen, probably left over from a previous decade. She turned it on, hoping for news, weather, some connection to the outside world. Glenn Miller's Moonlight Serenade filled the room. That was Glenn Miller with Moonlight Serenade, the DJ said, his voice crackling through the old speakers. And wasn't that just lovely? Now here's something to warm your hearts on this beautiful October evening. She changed the station, static. Changed it again, more static. Back to the original station. That was Glenn Miller with Moonlight Serenade, and wasn't that just lovely? Now here's something to warm your hearts. The same words, exactly the same. She turned the radio off, waited, turned it back on. On this beautiful October evening, for all you lovebirds out there, exactly where it had left off, as if time had paused while the radio was silent. She unplugged it. The music kept playing. Here's something to warm your hearts. Claire threw the radio against the wall. It shattered into pieces of plastic and wire. The music stopped. She stood there, breathing hard, surrounded by debris. In the silence, she could hear her own heartbeat, rapid and irregular, and then footsteps behind her. She spun around. No one there. The kitchen was empty, but she could still hear them. Footsteps, soft and measured, receding down the hallway. Moving away from her, toward the stairs, toward the 6th floor. The mirrors were the worst. Claire had never been particularly vain. She used mirrors for practical purposes, checking her appearance before meetings, making sure nothing was stuck in her teeth. But she'd never stared at her reflection, never studied herself with anything beyond professional detachment. Now she avoided mirrors entirely. It started with a flicker, a movement at the edge of her vision, there and gone before she could focus on it. She told herself it was exhaustion, sleep deprivation, the stress of her situation manifesting in minor hallucinations, but the flickers continued, and they got worse. She started noticing that her reflection moved differently, just slightly, a half-second delay between her movement and its response, a gesture that didn't quite match, a blink that came too late. She started taking different routes through the hotel, detours that avoided the large mirror in the lobby, the full-length mirror in her room, the row of mirrors in the 2nd-floor bathroom. But one morning, standing at the sink, she looked up without thinking, and her reflection wasn't there. The bathroom was in the mirror, the sink, the towels, the window behind her, showing the gray morning sky. Everything was exactly as it should be. Except for the space where Claire should have been standing. That was empty. She froze, toothbrush in hand. Heart stopped. Then, slowly, like a photograph developing in solution, her reflection faded in. First, the outline of her body. Then the details. Her face, her clothes, the toothbrush clutched in her trembling hand. It caught up to her movements, matched her exactly. But for a moment, a long, terrible moment, it had been absent, as if she were becoming something that mirrors couldn't see. She called a staff meeting that afternoon. Marjorie and Max sat in the small parlor off the lobby, their faces attentive and unreadable. A few other staff members, the cook, the groundskeeper, an elderly woman who seemed to do nothing but dust the same surfaces over and over, gathered around the edges of the room. "I'm reopening room 616, Claire said. The silence that followed was absolute, not just quiet, absent, as if sound itself had been sucked out of the room. Claire felt pressure in her ears, the way you feel it on an airplane during descent. She watched the older staff exchange glances, quick, silent, a conversation conducted entirely in looks she couldn't interpret. "Are you sure that's wise?" Max asked. His voice was careful, neutral. "I need to understand what my uncle was working on. The room is clearly central to whatever is happening in this hotel. I can't manage what I can't see." Another exchange of glances. "Of course," Marjorie said finally, "if that's what you want." She was smiling, not a supportive smile, not a concerned smile. Welcoming. That was the word. As if Claire had finally done something they'd been waiting for, taken a step she couldn't take back. That night, Claire woke at 3:47 a.m. She was standing in front of room 616. No memory of leaving her bed, no sense of transition. One moment she was asleep, the next she was here, in the dark hallway of the 6th floor, her bare feet cold against the hardwood, her hand already reaching for the doorknob. The door was old and heavy, its dark wood gleaming faintly in the emergency lighting. The brass numbers, 616, were tarnished but legible. Her fingers touched the knob. It was warm, not room temperature, warm like skin, like blood, like something alive was waiting on the other side. From beyond the door she heard music, a cello playing the Bach suite she used to play for Margaret, the one that sounded like the ocean, 3 short notes, too long, and beneath the music, something else. Breathing. Low and rhythmic, not quite human. Too slow, too deep, too deliberate. Claire ran. The music followed her down the stairs, fading with each floor but never quite disappearing. The breathing faded after the third floor, but even back in her room, door locked, lights blazing, she could still hear the cello, a ghost of a melody at the edge of hearing, playing the song she'd abandoned 25 years ago. She didn't sleep again that night. Chapter 8. The Young Man. He arrived the next afternoon. Claire was in the lobby, reviewing renovation estimates she'd generated mostly to give herself something to do, when the front door opened and a young man stumbled in. He was in his mid-20s, thin and pale, with dark circles under his eyes and the rumpled look of someone who hadn't slept in days. He wore a wrinkled button-down shirt and jeans, and he clutched a duffel bag with the desperation of a drowning man clinging to debris. He stopped just inside the door and looked around with an expression Claire recognized. It was the expression she'd worn when she first arrived. The look of someone who had walked into the wrong building and couldn't figure out how to leave. "Can I help you?" she asked. He startled as if he hadn't noticed her. I'm not sure." His voice was hoarse. "I was driving and then I wasn't, and now I'm here." His eyes were red-rimmed, desperate. "Where is here exactly?" "The Gates Hotel, Windfield." "I don't know those names." He shook his head rapidly. "I was driving to Portland to see my mother. She's in the hospital. She's sick, and I need to get to Portland." Something in his panic touched Claire. She recognized it. The desperate need to be somewhere else, anywhere else. The terror of being trapped in a place that didn't make sense. "Why don't you sit down?" she said, keeping her voice gentle. "I'll get you some water. We can figure this out." She led him to the sitting area near the fireplace. He moved stiffly, mechanically, like someone operating a body he wasn't quite connected to. When he sat, he gripped the arms of the chair as if afraid he might float away. "What's your name?" Daniel Reyes." He said it slowly, testing the words. "I'm Daniel Reyes. I'm Claire. I run this place." He looked at her with those desperate eyes. "You seem real." "As opposed to?" He didn't answer, just looked around the lobby with the expression of a man trying to convince himself he wasn't dreaming. Marjorie appeared with a tray of tea and sandwiches. She set it down without speaking, gave Claire a look she couldn't read, and left. "How did you get here, Daniel?" Claire poured him a cup of tea. "You said you were driving." "I was, interstate, middle of the night. I'd been driving for hours. My mother—" His voice broke. "She's dying. She asked to see me, and I drove all night to get there." "What happened?" "There was a truck, coming the other direction. The lights were so bright." He stared into the tea, not drinking. "I remember the lights, and then I was walking up the path to this hotel, and I don't know how." Claire felt something cold move through her chest. She thought about her own arrival, the train, the platform, the taxi driver who knew her name. She thought about the balcony, the city lights, the sirens. "The lights," she said carefully. "And then what?" "I don't know. There's a gap." His hands were shaking. "I can't remember. What happened to me?" She should have told him. She knew enough by now to suspect what he was, what she might be. But looking at his face, young, scared, still believing there was some rational explanation, she couldn't. "You're exhausted," she said instead. "You need rest. We have rooms. Stay the night, and things will be clearer in the morning." He looked at her with such desperate hope that she had to look away. She gave him a room on the 5th floor, not the 6th, not near 616. That night, she heard him crying through the walls, long, racking sobs that went on for hours. She lay in her bed and listened and didn't know how to help. In the morning, his room was empty. The bed was made. His bag was gone. She found him in the garden, sitting on the edge of the dry fountain, staring at the iron gates. "I tried to leave," he said without looking up. Every path leads back. I know. Now he did look at her. You do? I tried too, many times. He was quiet for a long moment. My mother, she's waiting for me. She asked me to come and His voice cracked. She's going to die thinking I didn't care enough to show up. I'm sorry. Will I see her again? Claire didn't know how to answer, so she told him the truth. I don't know. I don't understand this place yet, but I'm trying. He nodded slowly. Something in his posture eased, just slightly. Okay, he said. Okay, I can wait. They sat together in silence, watching the iron gates, the road beyond, the forest that led nowhere. She didn't know she was doing it, guiding him, helping him adjust. She didn't know that this was the job she'd already begun. Not yet. Chapter 9. The Forgetting. The next morning, Claire tried to call Margaret. It came over her suddenly, a wave of longing so intense it was almost physical. She had to hear her sister's voice, had to apologize, had to tell her finally, after all these years, that she was sorry, that she'd been wrong, that she'd give anything to go back and choose differently. She picked up her phone and started to dial, and stopped. She couldn't remember the number. Her fingers hovered over the screen, frozen. Margaret's number, the one Claire had known by heart since she was 12 years old, the one she'd dialed 1,000 times before everything fell apart. Gone. She tried to think, really think. She could picture the numbers in her mind, Margaret's messy handwriting on a slip of paper, the way she'd written it out when Claire got her first cell phone. She could see the paper clearly, could remember the pen Margaret had used, the kitchen table where they'd been sitting, the way the afternoon light had fallen across her sister's face. But the numbers themselves were blank, a void where memory should be. She tried her contacts, scrolled through the list. Margaret wasn't there. The names were all wrong, people she didn't recognize, numbers that belonged to strangers. Her whole contact list had been replaced by entries that meant nothing to her. John Smith, Jane Doe, names that sounded like placeholders in a test document. Her email address had been replaced by a string of random characters. Her photos, she checked, were gone too. The camera roll that should have held years of images was empty. She opened a browser, searched for herself. No results found. No, she whispered. No, no, no. She searched for Margaret, for her parents, for her company, her colleagues, anyone who might confirm that she had existed. Nothing. Every search returned the same empty page. She set the phone down carefully. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely control them. This was worse than the roads that led nowhere. Worse than the radio that wouldn't stop playing. Worse than the mirror that had shown her absence. This was erasure. She was being deleted from the world, piece by piece, memory by memory, and she couldn't stop it. She spent the next hour searching, trying every variation she could think of. Different spellings, different keywords, different approaches. Nothing worked. Every trace of Claire Anderson had vanished from the digital world, as if she had never existed. Finally, exhausted and desperate, she opened her uncle's journal. It was easier than sitting with the void, easier than facing what was happening to her. She found the passage she'd been looking for near the middle of the book. "The room exists at a threshold," Peter had written in his cramped handwriting. "A place where the membrane between states of being grows thin. I have studied it for years, and I still don't fully understand its nature, but I have learned a few things." The Abernathys came seeking their daughter Emily. She had died young, a childhood illness that took her before she reached her 7th birthday. They were devastated, broken by grief. They came to the hotel because they had heard stories, rumors of a place where the living could communicate with the dead. They found what they were looking for. I don't know how, but I know they never left. They chose to stay, to be with their daughter in whatever lies beyond. And then, underlined twice, it is not a place for the dead. It is a place for the almost, the ones who aren't quite finished becoming who they're going to be. Claire read the words again, and again, the almost, the ones who aren't quite finished. She thought about the balcony, the city lights, the sirens. She thought about Daniel asking about the lights on the highway. Number. She pushed the thought away. Near the end of the journal, she found another passage. The guests who stay too long begin to forget. They forget where they came from. They forget what happened to them. They settle into the rhythm of the hotel, and it becomes their whole world. Some of them are staff now. Some have been here for years. None of them remember how they arrived. Claire looked up from the journal. Through the window, she could see the lobby below. Marjorie at the front desk, sorting through mail that never seemed to change. Max in the library, reading the same book on the same page he'd been on for days. How long had they been here? How long had they been like this? Marjorie looked up. Their eyes met through the window. She smiled, and for the first time, Claire saw something behind it. Recognition. Knowledge. Marjorie knew what Claire was becoming. She'd probably known since the moment Claire walked through the door. Chapter 10. The Confession. Claire found Marjorie in the garden that evening, tending roses that never seemed to bloom or die. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The ocean glittered in the distance, its surface catching the dying light. It would have been beautiful under other circumstances. Now it just felt like another trap, a lovely cage, but a cage nonetheless. How long have you been here? Marjorie's hands stilled on the shears. She didn't pretend to misunderstand. Long enough that I've stopped counting. How long? A pause. Marjorie set down the shears and turned to face Claire. Her expression was neither defensive nor apologetic, just calm, accepting. I arrived in 1987. I was 43 years old, a high school English teacher from Vermont. I had a husband named Robert, 2 children, David and Sarah, a house with a blue door and a garden not so different from this one. What happened? Cancer. The word came out flat, factual. The fast kind. I was diagnosed in March. By August, the doctor said I had weeks, maybe less. And you came here? I came here. Marjorie picked up the shears again, turning them over in her hands. I don't remember why exactly. The reason is gone. That's one of the things we lose, eventually. I just remember arriving, walking up the path with a single suitcase, thinking I would rest, just for a little while, before... She didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. And you never left. I tried. The first year I tried every day. The roads that lead back, the doors that won't open. A small, sad smile. Eventually, you stop trying. You find purpose instead. Purpose. The new ones come confused, frightened. They don't understand what's happened to them, what they've become. Someone has to help them adjust. Someone has to show them the way. The way to what? Marjorie's eyes held hers. Kind eyes. Ancient eyes. Room 616. Eventually, they all find their way there, and then they choose. Choose what? What comes next? She cut a dead bloom, letting it fall to the ground. Some go toward the light, some go the other direction, and some stay, like me, like Max, like your Uncle Peter. Claire's throat was tight. Why stay? Because someone has to tend the gates, Claire. Someone has to welcome the lost. It's not punishment. It's not even purgatory, really. She touched Claire's arm gently. It's service. And my uncle? Peter was the best of us. He understood the hotel better than anyone. When he finally chose to move on, he left it to you. Why me? Marjorie was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. Because he knew you would come. He knew what you were, what you needed. A pause. He knew you'd been lost for a long time before you ever reached that balcony. Claire flinched as if she'd been struck. That's not... You don't have to say it yet. Marjorie's voice was gentle. "But you already know. You've known since you arrived. You just haven't been ready to look." She went back to her roses. Claire stood in the dying light, the truth pressing against her chest like a weight she couldn't put down. The balcony, the city lights, the sirens, the strange calm that had washed over her. And then everything was quiet. She had known. Some part of her had known from the moment she stepped off that train onto the empty platform. Known that she wasn't here to inherit a hotel. Known that the journey wasn't about real estate or family obligations. Known that she was dead. The word sat in her mind like a stone in still water. Dead. Claire Anderson was dead. She had stepped off that balcony, or fallen, or jumped. The details were blurry now. And she had died. And instead of going wherever the dead were supposed to go, she had ended up here. In this strange hotel at the edge of the world, in this liminal space where the lost found their way. How? The word came out broken. How do I? You don't have to figure it out tonight. Marjorie set down her shears and took Claire's hands. Her fingers were warm, solid, real. You have time. That's the one thing we all have here. Time. I don't want time. I want... Claire's voice broke. I want my sister. I want to tell her I'm sorry. I want to go back and do everything differently. I know, Marjorie squeezed her hands. I know, but some doors only open in one direction. She left Claire there, alone in the garden, as the last light faded from the sky. Chapter 11. The Diary. The storage room was in the basement of the hotel, a forgotten space crammed with decades of accumulated possessions. Steamer trunks and hat boxes, broken furniture waiting for repairs that would never come, boxes of records, their labels faded to illegibility. Claire had been searching for hours. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for. Some evidence, some explanation, some proof that she wasn't losing her mind, that the Abernathys had been real, that their story was true, that there was precedent for whatever was happening to her. She found the diary in a trunk near the back of the room. It was leather-bound, water-stained, fragile with age. The name on the inside cover was written in an elegant hand, Helen Abernathy. Claire sat on a dusty trunk and began to read. March 3rd, 1961. Emily's cough is worse. The doctors say it's just a cold, that children get sick all the time and recover. But a mother knows. A mother always knows when something is wrong. April 17th, 1961. Not a cold, something in her lungs. They're running tests, so many tests. James won't look at me. He's afraid that if he looks at me, he'll have to say what we're both thinking. June 2nd, 1961. She's getting worse. We've tried everything. Every doctor, every treatment, every specialist who would see us. Nothing works. The medicine makes her sick. The procedures make her weak. And still, the darkness in her lungs keeps growing. She asked me yesterday why she can't play with the other children, why she has to stay in bed, why she's always so tired. I didn't know what to tell her. August 14th, 1961. Emily passed this morning. She was 6 years old. She never got to start first grade, never got to ride a bicycle, never got to grow up and fall in love and have children of her own. All the moments we imagined for her, all the possibilities, gone, erased. I don't know how to be alive without her. James says we need to keep going, that Emily would want us to live. But I look at her empty room and I can't remember how. I can't remember why. Claire turned the pages. The entries grew more erratic. Dates skipped. Handwriting growing shaky and desperate. November 29th, 1961. James found a spiritualist in Boston, a woman who claims she can communicate with the dead. I know how it sounds. I know what the doctors would say, what the priest would say, what any rational person would say. But I can't stop thinking about Emily alone in the dark, wondering where we went, why we left her, if there's any chance at all. February 3rd, 1962. We've heard about a hotel, a place called the Gates on the coast of Maine. They say strange things happen there. They say people go looking for answers and find them. They say some people never come back. Good. October 12th, 1962. We arrived today. The hotel is old and beautiful and strange. There's a woman at the front desk who looked at us as if she'd been expecting us. There's a man in the library who watches but doesn't speak. And there's a room on the 6th floor, room 616. The owner, a man named Peter, told us it was closed, not available for guests, but I can feel her there. I can feel Emily waiting for us just beyond a door that isn't quite closed. Tonight we'll find a way in. October 13, 1962. We found her. She was waiting, just like I knew she would be. Our sweet girl. She looks exactly the same. Dark curls, bright eyes, the dimple in her left cheek that always appeared when she smiled. She doesn't understand why she can't come home with us. She asked if we're staying, if we can play, if everything is going to be okay now. I told her yes. Yes to all of it. Because we understand now. We understand everything. The man in the black suit came to us this morning. He offered us a choice. We could leave, go back to our empty house, our empty lives, our world without Emily. Or we could stay. With her. Forever. James and I looked at each other. We didn't even have to discuss it. It wasn't a hard decision. It was the easiest thing we've ever done. The diary ended there. Claire closed it gently, her hands trembling. The man in the black suit. Lou. He'd been here in 1962. He'd offered the Abernathys a choice, and they'd chosen not the light, not the darkness, but something in between, eternal presence with their daughter. A family reunited in whatever lay beyond room 616. It should have been comforting, evidence that there was something after death, something meaningful, something that could heal even the deepest wounds. Instead, it terrified her. Because if the Abernathys had chosen, if everyone eventually chose, then she would have to choose too. And she didn't know what she wanted. She didn't know if she was ready to let go. Chapter 12. The Threshold. That night, Claire went to room 616, not sleepwalking this time, a choice. The 6th floor was quiet, the hallway lit only by emergency lighting that cast long shadows along the walls. The air was different here, thicker, charged, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. Each step felt heavy, deliberate, as if she were walking through water. The door to 616 stood at the end of the corridor. It looked ordinary enough, dark wood, brass numbers, a simple handle. But as Claire approached, she felt the wrongness radiating from it like heat. This was a threshold, a border between one state of being and another. She touched the doorknob, warm, blood warm, the temperature of living flesh, and then, without her turning it, the door swung open. The room beyond was modest, vintage wallpaper, antique furniture, a window overlooking the ocean. Nothing frightening, nothing obviously supernatural, just a hotel room, like any other. But the air inside was cold, 10 degrees colder than the hallway, and there was a sound, not quite audible, not quite imagined, like the whisper of voices just below the threshold of hearing. Claire stepped inside. The door closed behind her. She didn't flinch, didn't try to open it. She had known somehow that this was a one-way trip, that entering 616 meant something, changed something. She sat on the edge of the bed. The whispers grew louder. Not words, exactly, but voices. Dozens of them, hundreds, overlapping and interweaving like threads in a tapestry. She closed her eyes and let them wash over her. Sleep came, and with it, dreams. She found herself in a corridor, not the hotel hallway, but something else, something infinite. It stretched endlessly in both directions, lit by 2 sources of light at either end. one warm and golden, one cold and pale. At the far end of the corridor, 3 figures waited, a young couple. Between them, a little girl with dark curls, the Abernathys and Emily. Claire walked toward them. Her footsteps made no sound on the floor that might not have been a floor. The woman, Helen, didn't speak. She just watched Claire with patient eyes, waiting, as if Claire were late for an appointment she didn't remember making. The man, James, tilted his head, listening for a sound beyond hearing, and Emily looked up at Claire with eyes that were ancient and young at the same time. "You tap it on your desk," the girl said. 3 and 2, 3 and 2. You don't even know you're doing it." "How do you know that?" "We know everything about you." Emily's voice was matter of fact. "We've been watching since you arrived. You're like us, Claire. You just don't remember yet." I remember arriving. I remember the train, the taxi. You remember what the hotel showed you, what you were ready to see." Emily's smile was sad. "But what came before? What happened on the balcony?" Claire opened her mouth to answer. The city lights, the cold air, the strange calm. And then the memory slipped away, like water through her fingers. I can't. That's okay." Emily reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, not dead cold, but cold like stone that's never seen sunlight. "You'll remember when you're ready. Everyone remembers, eventually." "What is this place?" "It's the in-between." Emily gestured at the corridor, the lights at either end. "The place where you choose." "Choose what?" "Where you go next, what you become." She pointed to the warm light. "That way is letting go, moving on, whatever comes after." She pointed to the cold light. "That way is something else, power, maybe, continuation. Lou could tell you more about it." "And if I don't want either?" Emily looked at her with those ancient eyes. "Then you stay, like us, like Marjorie and Max, like your Uncle Peter, until he was ready to leave." A pause. "There's always work to do, Claire, people to help, lost ones to guide." "Is that what you do? Help people?" "We help them find their families, the ones they lost." Emily squeezed her hand. "Like I found mine." Claire looked at the golden light, felt its pull, warm, peaceful, final. She looked at Lou, waiting in the cold. She looked at the Abernathys, patient and present and whole. And then she woke. The door to 616 was open now. She stumbled out into the corridor, gasping. Something had changed. She could feel it in her bones, in the weight of her own body. Something had come loose. Something had shifted. The mirror at the end of the hallway caught her reflection. It was smiling. She wasn't smiling. And behind her reflection, visible only in the glass, a crowd of figures. Dozens of them, hundreds, all watching, all waiting. Claire didn't look back to see if they were really there. She already knew the answer. Part 3. The Revelation. Chapter 13. The Obituary. She went back to room 616 the next morning. Not because she wanted to. Every instinct she had screamed at her to stay away, to leave the door closed, to pretend she'd never opened it in the first place, but the dream wouldn't let her go. Emily's words echoed in her mind, the lights at either end of the corridor, the choice that waited for her. The room looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, more ordinary. The vintage wallpaper was faded, the antique furniture dusty, the window smeared with salt from the ocean air. It was just a room, nothing more. But Claire knew better now. She began to search. She didn't know what she was looking for. More evidence, more answers, more pieces of the puzzle that refused to come together. She opened drawers, checked under the bed, ran her fingers along the wallpaper looking for hidden seams. Near the headboard, her fingers caught on something. A gap in the paneling, barely visible, easy to miss if you weren't looking. She pressed, and a section of wall clicked open, revealing a cavity behind it. The space was filled with dust-caked objects, a silver locket on a tarnished chain. When Claire opened it, she found a photograph inside, a little girl with dark curls. Emily Abernathy. A leather diary, the same one she'd found in the storage room, or perhaps another copy. The hotel seemed to have multiple versions of things. Letters tied with faded ribbon, photographs of the Abernathy family, all three of them smiling, and newspaper clippings. Claire's hands trembled as she pulled them out. The first was old, yellowed with age. The headline read, "Couple found dead in hotel room. Carbon monoxide poisoning," the article explained. "A faulty heater." October 15, 1962. So, that was what had happened to the Abernathys. Not a mysterious disappearance, not a supernatural vanishing. They had died here, in this room, and whatever came after, the reunion with Emily, the choice to stay, had happened on the other side of death. Claire reached for the second clipping. It was newer, the paper was whiter, less fragile, the print was cleaner. New York consultant dies in fall. Her hands went still. She read the first paragraph without breathing. Claire Anderson, 43, a senior consultant at McKinley Partners, was found dead early Monday morning on the sidewalk below her office building. The death has been ruled an apparent suicide. Colleagues described Ms. Anderson as driven and successful, but increasingly isolated in recent months. The words blurred. Her vision swam. Ms. Anderson is survived by her sister, Margaret Anderson of Brooklyn. The photograph was grainy, pulled from a company website probably, or a LinkedIn profile, but it was unmistakably her. The same professional smile, the same carefully composed expression, the same eyes that revealed nothing. "No," she said it out loud, as if saying it could make it true. "No, that's not. I'm here. I'm standing here." She dropped the clipping, backed away from it like it was something dangerous. "I took a train. I came to this hotel. I've been working, renovating, making lists." Her voice cracked. She thought about the calendar that wouldn't change. October 12th, over and over, no matter how many times she circled a different date. She thought about the radio playing the same song, the same words, the same DJ patter, as if time had stopped. She thought about the man at breakfast who vanished when she turned away, the phone number she couldn't remember, the contacts that didn't exist, the search results that came up empty, the clock at the station frozen at 3:47, the roads that all led back, the balcony, the city lights, the sirens, the strange calm, and then everything was quiet. "No," she said again, but the word had no force left. She sank to the floor. The newspaper clipping lay beside her, her own face staring up at her from the grainy photograph. A stranger now. A ghost. "Margaret will never know I was sorry." That was the thought that broke her. Not her own death. That was abstract, impossible to hold. She had spent 43 years being alive, and the concept of being dead was simply too large to process. It didn't feel real. Nothing about this felt real. But Margaret. Margaret reading that headline. Margaret getting the phone call from some hospital administrator or police officer. Margaret having to identify the body, plan the funeral, answer the questions of well-meaning relatives and distant friends. Margaret, who had begged Claire to feel something, who had accused her of becoming a robot, who had asked where the real Claire had gone. Margaret would never know that Claire had wanted to call, that she'd stood on that balcony thinking about apologies she should have made years ago, that in her last conscious moments, Claire had finally understood what she'd lost, and that the understanding had come too late. That was the real tragedy. Not that Claire had died, but that she had died without ever bridging the gap between them. The silence that had calcified into permanence was now truly permanent. Eternal. Claire pressed her hands against her face and wept, not pretty crying, not the restrained tears of a woman who always kept her composure, the ugly animal sounds of someone whose entire understanding of reality has collapsed, whose regrets have become infinite, who will never have the chance to say the words that mattered most. She cried for the cello she'd abandoned, for the music she'd silenced in herself, for the sister who had sat outside her door, asking for the sad song that sounded like the ocean. She cried for the life she'd been too afraid to live. The sobs racked her body, wave after wave, until she was empty, until there was nothing left to cry out, until she was hollow, scraped clean, a shell where a person used to be. She stayed on the floor until the light through the window changed, from morning to afternoon to the long gold of evening. She didn't move, didn't eat, didn't answer when someone knocked on the door. When she finally looked up, Max was standing in the doorway. "How long have you known?" Her voice was raw, barely a whisper. "Since you arrived. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed it?" She didn't answer. They both knew. Max came and sat beside her on the floor. He didn't touch her. He just sat, present, patient. "It gets easier," he said after a while. "Not better, but easier." "How long have you been here?" 1943. I was a pilot, shot down over the Pacific. He was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. "I had a wife named Dorothy. 2 sons, Michael and Peter. The youngest was only 3 when I left for the war. I never got to see them grow up." "I'm sorry." "So am I." He looked at her. "But I found purpose, and so will you." Claire stared at the newspaper clipping on the floor, her own face, pixelated and distant, a stranger now. "I don't know if I can." "You don't have to know yet," Max said. "You just have to keep going." Chapter 14. The Offer. Max left her alone after that. She asked him to. She sat in room 616 as the evening light faded, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple to black. The ocean glittered in the distance, catching the last rays of the sun. It would have been beautiful once, before she knew what it meant to be here. "It's difficult, isn't it?" Lou Seifert was by the window. She hadn't heard him arrive, hadn't heard the door open. One moment she was alone, the next he was there. Dark suit, pale face, those knowing eyes that seemed to see straight through her. "Learning what you really are?" Claire looked at him. The fear she might have expected wasn't there, just a hollow certainty, a weight that pressed down on her chest. "All those years optimizing my calendar," she said, "and I couldn't even schedule my own death properly." Lou's eyebrows rose. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation. Humor, at a moment like this. "Would you prefer hysterics?" "Most people manage something between the two." He moved from the window, his footsteps making no sound on the wooden floor. "But you're not most people, are you, Claire? That's what interested me from the beginning. You knew, that night in the library. You knew what I was. I knew what you were becoming." He sat in the armchair across from her, crossing his legs with elegant precision. "Most people who arrive here are confused, frightened. They spend weeks, sometimes months, wandering the halls, trying to escape, refusing to accept what's happened. It's tedious, frankly, the denial, the bargaining, the endless negotiations with reality." He leaned forward. "But you walked in and started renovating, making lists, treating the situation like a project management problem." A smile crossed his face. "In all my years, I've never seen that." "How many years?" "More than you'd believe." Claire thought about his name. Lou Seifert. She said it in her mind, running the syllables together. Lucifer. "Names are just stories," Lou said, as if he'd heard her thoughts. "I'm someone who's been doing this for a very long time. What I'm called matters less than what I offer." "And what do you offer?" He stood, moving to the window again. The moon had risen, full and bright, casting silver light across the ocean. You don't have to stay here, Claire. There are realms beyond this one, places of power and possibility. You've spent your whole life chasing success, climbing ladders, accumulating achievements, proving yourself. What if you didn't have to stop? I'm dead. Death is just a transition, one of many. He turned to face her. The universe is larger than you can imagine. There are hierarchies, structures, systems that extend far beyond this little way station, and there are positions within those structures for people with particular talents. What kind of talents? Drive, ambition, the ability to look at a problem and find a solution, regardless of sentiment. His eyes met hers. You traded connection for achievement your whole life. Every relationship you abandoned, every emotional attachment you severed, those were choices, deliberate choices. You understood, even if you never articulated it, that feelings were obstacles, that caring was weakness. You let your sister call you a robot. You let the silence grow until it became permanent. You chose spreadsheets over music, success over love, isolation over vulnerability. His voice was soft, almost gentle. I'm not criticizing, Claire. I'm recognizing. You're one of us. You always were. The words hit her like a physical blow, because part of her, a larger part than she wanted to admit, recognized the truth in them. She had made those choices. She had prioritized achievement over everything else. She had looked at her own heart and found it inconvenient. What are you offering? She asked. Continuation, power, purpose. He stepped closer. You would never have to feel lost again. Never have to wonder what you're for. There's always work to be done, Claire. Always systems to be optimized. Always souls to be sorted. Souls. Someone has to do it. Someone has to keep the machinery running. He smiled. It's not so different from what you did in life. Consulting. Evaluation, determining the value of things. Claire was quiet for a long moment. She thought about Margaret, the cello, the way it had felt to play music that made her sister cry. She thought about Daniel, sitting by the fountain, waiting for news of his mother. She thought about Marjorie, tending roses that never bloomed or died. She walked past Lou to the window. Outside, the ocean stretched toward a horizon she would never reach. The moon hung low in the sky, impossibly large, impossibly bright. No, I spent my whole life trading connection for achievement. She turned to face him. You're offering me eternity to do the same thing. That's not a promotion, Lou. That's a prison sentence. He studied her. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of something that might have been respect. Stronger than most, but strength isn't wisdom. Maybe not, but it's my choice. Is it? He tilted his head. You're choosing to stay here, to spend eternity shepherding the lost, helping them find their way to one light or another. You're choosing service over power. That's not strength. That's surrender. That's love. The word hung between them. Lou was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, almost wistful. You really believe that? I don't know what I believe, but I know what I chose wrong when I was alive. I know what I regret. She held his gaze. I'm not going to make the same mistake twice. He moved toward the door, paused. For a moment, something flickered across his face, something that looked impossibly like loneliness. The offer doesn't expire, Claire. When you tire of playing shepherd to the lost, when the centuries start to weigh on you, when the endless parade of broken souls becomes too much to bear, you know how to find me. He was gone. The door had never opened. Claire stood alone in room 616, the moonlight cold and bright, and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Chapter 15, The Choice. That night, the storm came. It rolled in from the ocean like a living thing, dark clouds boiling across the sky, wind howling through the corridors of the hotel, lightning flickering on the horizon. The building groaned and creaked, its old bones protesting the assault. Claire found herself at room 616 again. She didn't remember walking there. One moment she was in her own room, listening to the storm. The next, she was standing in the sixth-floor corridor, her hand on the doorknob. The door swung open at her touch. Beyond it, not a room, a corridor, the same one from her dream, stretching endlessly in both directions, lit by two sources of light at either end, one warm and golden, one cold and pale. She stepped through. The storm vanished. The hotel vanished. There was only the corridor and the lights and the silence. Figures emerged from the shadows. Max first, his pilot's uniform crisp and clean, his face young again, the face of the man he'd been in 1943, before the war took him. Then Marjorie, no longer gray-haired, but vibrant, radiant, the school teacher she'd been before the cancer. And behind them, a figure Claire recognized from photographs. Uncle Peter, tall, with kind eyes and a flannel shirt, his hands in his pockets, the same warm smile she remembered from childhood. "Hey, kiddo." His voice was exactly as she'd imagined it. "You've done well." "I haven't done anything." "You stayed. When Lou offered you power, you chose something harder." He moved closer, and she could see now that he was translucent, not quite solid, a presence more than a body. "That's not nothing. You gave me the hotel, even after we barely spoke for years. Why?" "Because of after, not in spite of it." He smiled. "I knew you'd need somewhere to land. I knew you'd been lost for a long time before you reached that balcony, and I knew you had the capacity to find your way, if someone gave you the chance." "What do I do now?" Peter gestured to the lights at either end of the corridor. "The same thing everyone does. You choose." Claire looked at the warm light. It pulsed gently, like a heartbeat, radiating peace and release. Looking at it, she felt a pull, a longing to let go, to rest, to finally be done with the weight of existence. She looked at the cold light. At the edge of its glow, Lou Seifert waited. Patient, eternal, his offer still standing. "What are they?" she asked. "Paths," Peter said. "The warm one is letting go, moving on. Whatever comes after, heaven, rebirth, dissolution into the infinite, no one knows for certain, but it's an ending." "And the cold?" "Power, continuation, service to something vast and old and hungry." He paused. "Some people find purpose there. Some people find it clarifying, but it changes you, slowly, until you forget what you were." "What did you choose?" "I stayed, for a long time, to help others find their way." He looked at her with those kind eyes. "It's not glamorous work. It's not exciting. You spend years, decades, centuries, guiding the lost, listening to their stories, helping them come to terms with what they are, and then you watch them leave. Why stay? Because someone has to, because the work matters, because—" He stopped. When he spoke again, his voice was thick. "Because sometimes you help a young man find his mother, or a couple find their daughter, or a woman find the music she'd lost." Claire thought about Daniel sitting by the fountain. He made it? Daniel? He made it. The warm light. His mother was waiting for him. Peter smiled. "You helped him, Claire. You didn't even know you were doing it, but you helped him find his way." She felt something loosen in her chest. Relief, sadness, hope. "I can do that? Help people?" "That's what we do. That's what we are." He gestured to Marjorie, Max, and the other figures gathering in the corridor. Dozens of them, hundreds, all the souls who had chosen to stay. "We're the ones who tend the threshold. We're the ones who make sure no one has to face the choice alone." Claire looked at the golden light, felt its pull. She looked at Lou, waiting in the cold. She looked at the figures around her, Marjorie's kind eyes, Max's steady presence, Peter's patient smile, and she thought about Margaret, about the cello, about the sad song that sounded like the ocean. "I want to stay," she said. "You're sure?" "I spent my whole life running from connection, running from feeling, running from anything that might make me vulnerable." She took a deep breath. "I'm done running." Peter nodded slowly. Something in his expression shifted. Pride, maybe, or recognition. "Then welcome home, Claire." She turned her back on the lights, both of them, and walked back toward the door. "You'll tire of it," Lou's voice echoed from the cold. "They all do." Claire didn't answer. She stepped through the door into room 616, into the storm, into the hotel that would be her home for as long as she chose to stay. Not an ending, a beginning. Epilogue. 6 months later, or what passed for months in the strange time of the hotel, a new guest checked in. Claire was behind the front desk when she arrived. A young woman, late 20s, with an expensive suit rumpled from travel and a laptop bag over one shoulder. Her fingers drummed against her thigh as she waited. A nervous habit, Claire recognized. "I need a quiet room," the woman said. "Good Wi-Fi, no distractions, I have a deadline." Claire smiled. She knew that tone, that urgency, the desperate belief that if you just worked hard enough, fast enough, efficiently enough, you could outrun whatever was chasing you. "I was you once." "Welcome to the gates. I'm Claire." The woman paused, her brow furrowed. "Have we met? You seem familiar." "I get that a lot." Claire led her toward the stairs, making small talk about the hotel's history, the beautiful views, the quiet atmosphere perfect for work. The young woman, Jessica, she said her name was, nodded along without really listening. Her mind was clearly elsewhere, on the deadline, on the work, on all the things she thought she needed to do. She didn't remember how she'd arrived. They never did. Claire gave her a room on the 5th floor, not the 6th, not near 616, not yet. "Dinner is at 7 if you're hungry. Otherwise, the kitchen can send something up." "I'll probably just work through." Jessica was already pulling out her laptop. "Thanks." Claire left her to it. Downstairs, Marjorie was arranging flowers at the front desk, fresh lilies from the greenhouse that existed whether you looked for it or not. "A new one?" "A new one. She reminds me of you." Claire smiled. "I noticed." She walked to the window and looked out at the hotel grounds. The garden had improved since she'd arrived, not because anyone had tended it, but because the hotel seemed to respond to care. When you paid attention to it, when you invested yourself in its maintenance, it flourished. And there, at the iron gates, a figure in a black suit. Lou Seifert. He wasn't looking at Claire. His gaze was fixed on the upper floors, on the window where Jessica was settling in, already lost in her work, already running from something she hadn't yet named. He glanced down. Their eyes met. He smiled, that ancient smile, knowing and patient, and tipped an imaginary hat. Then he walked into the shadows beyond the gate. Claire watched the empty gates for a long moment. He hadn't gone far. He never did. The offer didn't expire, and there would always be some souls who chose the cold light, who found in Lou's offer something they needed more than peace. Claire didn't judge them. She couldn't. She understood the appeal of power, of certainty, of never having to feel lost again. But she also understood what it cost. Somewhere in the hotel, the piano began to play. The Bach cello suite, gentle, melancholy, the sad song that sounded like the ocean. Claire listened, really listened, for the first time since she was 18 years old. She could still hear it, the music she'd abandoned, the part of herself she'd killed before she ever stepped onto that balcony. It wasn't gone. It had never been gone. It had just been waiting for her to remember how to listen. She thought about Margaret, about the 4 years of silence between them, about the words she would never get to say. But maybe there were other ways to speak. Maybe the work she did here, the souls she helped, the care she invested in this strange and liminal place, maybe that was a kind of apology, a kind of amends, not to Margaret directly, but to the universe that contained her, to the principle of connection that Claire had spent so long denying. She couldn't fix what she'd broken, but she could choose differently now. She could be different now. That was something. At the far end of the corridor, room 616 waited, patient, ready, open. And in the years to come, the decades, the centuries, Claire would guide countless souls to that door. She would listen to their stories, hold their hands, help them come to terms with what they were. She would watch them choose the golden light or the cold one, and occasionally one of them would turn around and choose to stay. She would tend the threshold. She would welcome the lost. And sometimes, late at night, when the hotel was quiet and the ocean whispered against the shore, she would sit at the window and remember a girl who had loved music once, a sister who had asked for the sad song, a life that had been too short and too small and too afraid. She would remember, and she would grieve, and she would keep going, because that was the job, because someone had to do it. Because in the end, love wasn't just about the people you saved. It was about showing up, day after day, and trying anyway. Claire Anderson had died alone on a sidewalk in New York City. Claire Anderson had found her way to a hotel at the edge of the world. Claire Anderson had chosen to stay. And somehow, that was enough. The end. In the months that followed, Claire learned the rhythms of the hotel. She learned which rooms were safe for new arrivals, the ones on the lower floors, away from 616, where the strangeness was muted and the adjustment period could be gentle. She learned which guests needed space and which needed company, which could be helped with kindness and which required harder truths. She learned that some souls weren't ready to choose, no matter how much time they spent here. They would wander the corridors for years, decades, unable to let go of the lives they'd left behind. These were the hardest cases, the ones who needed the most patience, the most care, the most willingness to simply be present with their suffering. And she learned, slowly and painfully, how to live with what she'd lost. The memory of Margaret didn't fade. If anything, it grew sharper with time. Claire could picture her sister's face more clearly now than she ever had when she was alive, could hear her voice, feel the weight of her disappointment, understand with perfect clarity all the ways Claire had failed her. But she also learned that grief wasn't a problem to be solved. It was a state to be inhabited, a room in the house of self that would always be furnished with sorrow. You didn't escape it. You didn't overcome it. You simply learned to live in it, to carry it with you as you did the work that needed doing. That first year, Claire helped 17 souls find their way. Some went quickly, a few days of confusion, a moment of recognition, a walk toward the golden light with something like peace on their faces. Others took months wrestling with their deaths, their regrets, their inability to accept what they'd become. When they finally chose, light or darkness or staying, she was there, watching, helping, being present in a way she had never managed to be when she was alive. And sometimes, late at night, when the hotel was quiet and the ocean whispered against the shore, she would sit at the window and remember a girl who had loved music once, a sister who had asked for the sad song, a life that had been too short and too small and too afraid. She would remember, and she would grieve, and she would keep going, because that was the job, because someone had to do it, because in the end, love wasn't just about the people you saved. It was about showing up day after day and trying anyway. Claire Anderson had died alone on a sidewalk in New York City. Claire Anderson had found her way to a hotel at the edge of the world. Claire Anderson had chosen to stay. And somehow, that was enough. A note on the staff. One evening, weeks into her stay, Claire found Max in the library staring at a book he wasn't reading. "Tell me," she said without preamble, "tell me your story." He looked up. His eyes were old, far older than his face, and filled with a weariness that went beyond exhaustion. "I was a pilot, Navy, flew torpedo bombers off the Hornet in '42, then off the Enterprise after that. We were fighting the Japanese in the Pacific, island hopping, trying to push back against the tide." "What happened?" "June 1943, anti-aircraft fire caught my engine. I went down in the water about 2 miles offshore." He paused, his eyes going somewhere far away. "I survived the crash, even managed to get out of the plane before it sank. But I was too far from land, and the water was too cold, and my arm was broken." "You drowned?" "I drowned." He said it matter-of-factly. "And then I was here, walking up the path to the hotel, water dripping off my flight suit, my arm somehow whole again." "Did you try to leave?" "Of course, everyone tries. The roads, the ocean, even the sky. I tried to swim once, to fly. It always led back here." "What made you stay, in the end?" "Dorothy." The name came out softly. "My wife. I spent years hoping she would show up, that she would die and find her way here, and we would be together again." "Did she?" "No, she remarried in 1948. A good man. He raised my boys as his own. She lived a full life, happy, I think. She died in 1987, but she didn't come here. She went on to whatever comes after." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. That's how it should work. She let go. She moved forward. That's what the living are supposed to do." He looked at Claire with those ancient eyes. "I stayed because I couldn't let go. And by the time I accepted that, I'd been here so long that staying seemed easier than choosing." "Do you regret it?" "Sometimes, when I remember what it felt like to fly." He was quiet for a moment. "But then someone arrives, someone lost, frightened, confused, and I help them. And for a moment, it feels like maybe this is what I was always meant to do." Claire thought about his words for a long time after. She thought about Dorothy, remarrying and moving forward, about the courage it took to let go, and the courage it took to stay. She wasn't sure which choice was harder, but she was starting to understand that both had value. The days with Daniel. Over the next few days, Claire found herself spending more and more time with Daniel. It started accidentally, running into him in the library, finding him staring at the ocean from the dining room window, discovering him in the garden, trying once again to find a path that led away from the hotel. Each time, she would sit with him for a while, listen to him talk about his mother, his life, the accident he couldn't quite remember. "Tell me about her," she said one afternoon as they sat together on the dry fountain's edge. "Your mother." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick. "She's a baker. Was a baker. Is a baker?" He shook his head. "I don't know what tense to use anymore. She had this theory that you could tell everything about a person by how they made bread, whether they rushed or took their time, whether they trusted the dough or fought against it." "What did she say about you?" "That I rushed everything, that I needed to learn patience." A small smile. "I was always in a hurry to get to the next thing. Graduate, finish college, start my career, prove something. I was always going to visit her later, when I had more time." Claire recognized that story. It was her own story, told in different words. "What did you want to tell her?" "That I loved her, that I was grateful, that all those years she spent working 2 jobs to keep me fed, I saw it, I appreciated it, even when I didn't say so." He looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. "I was driving to tell her. She called and said she was sick, and I got in the car and drove all night, and—" The lights on the highway, the gap in his memory. Claire reached out and took his hand. His fingers were cold, but they gripped hers tightly. She knew, Claire said. Mothers always know. They sat in silence for a while, holding hands, watching the iron gates that led nowhere. "What about you?" Daniel asked eventually. "Who are you trying to reach?" Claire thought about Margaret, the phone number she couldn't remember, the silence that had become permanent. "My sister. We had a fight, a long time ago. I never apologized." "What was the fight about?" "She accused me of giving up on the only thing that ever made me real. I told her she didn't understand." Claire smiled sadly. She was right. I just couldn't admit it. The next morning, Daniel was different. The fear was gone. The confusion. He had remembered, really remembered, what had happened on that highway. "I'm ready," he said simply. That night, she heard music coming from the 6th floor, and she knew, without knowing how, that Daniel had found his way to room 616. In the morning, he was gone. Marjorie found her in the garden, staring at the fountain. The young man chose the golden light. His mother was waiting. Marjorie's voice was gentle. "You helped him, Claire. You helped him remember what mattered." "I didn't do anything. You did everything. You sat with him. You listened. You shared your own pain so he could face his." She touched Claire's arm. "That's what we do here. That's the work." Claire thought about Daniel's mother, a baker who believed you could tell everything about a person by how they made bread. She thought about patience and rushing and all the ways we fail to show up for the people we love. And she understood, for the first time, what the hotel was asking of her. A conversation in the garden. She found Lou in the garden late one night, sitting on the edge of the dry fountain, looking up at the fixed moon. "I read my uncle's journal," she said, "about you. Did you find it illuminating? He said you were lonely." Lou's expression didn't change. Peter was perceptive, one of the few people who bothered to look beneath the surface. "Is he right?" "I've been doing this for a very long time, longer than your species has had written language. I've watched civilizations rise and fall, empires crumble into dust, entire cultures vanish from memory." "That sounds exhausting." "It is, but it's also clarifying. When you've seen enough, you stop expecting things to change. You just exist, continue, do the job you were made to do." "What were you made to do?" "To offer choices, to present alternatives, to ensure that no soul passes through without understanding that there are other options." He smiled faintly. The universe values free will, even at the cost of some souls choosing unwisely. Claire sat down on the fountain's edge, a few feet away from him. "Why do you keep doing it if you don't believe in what you're selling?" "Because someone has to. Because the system requires it. Because—" He stopped. When he continued, his voice was barely a whisper. "Because it's all I know how to do. I've been this for so long that I don't remember being anything else." "That sounds like prison." "It does, doesn't it?" He looked at her with those ancient eyes. "Which is why I find you interesting, Claire. You recognized it. Most people see the power, the mystery, the danger. They don't see the cage." "I've built my own cages. I know what they look like." "Yes, you do." He stood, brushing imaginary dust from his suit. "Your uncle was a good man. When he left, when he finally chose the light, I was sorry to see him go." "Will you be sorry to see me go, eventually?" "Eventually." He smiled. "But that's a long time from now, and in the meantime, you have work to do." He walked toward the gates, his figure growing smaller in the moonlight. "Lou," she called after him. "Thank you." He paused. "For what?" "For being honest, for not pretending to be something you're not." "Ah," that ancient smile. "Don't thank me yet. The offer still stands. It always will. And someday, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not for centuries, you'll be tired enough to take it." He walked into the shadows and was gone. Claire sat alone on the fountain, watching the space where he'd been, and thought about cages, about the ones we build ourselves and the ones that are built for us, about the difference between a trap and a home, the family in the hall. She met them, finally, in the corridor outside, room 616. Claire had been returning from breakfast when she saw three figures at the end of the hall. They stood close together, holding hands, a man, a woman, and between them, a little girl with dark curls. The Abernathys. She recognized them from the photographs, from the diary, from her dreams. "You're Claire," Helen said. Her voice was warm, gentle, nothing like the frantic grief of her journal entries. "Peter's niece?" "Yes. We've been watching you since you arrived." James smiled. "He was so proud of you, even when you struggled." Claire looked at Emily. The little girl stared back with those ancient eyes, the same ones she'd seen in the dream, the ones that held centuries of wisdom in a 6-year-old face. "You've been here a long time," Claire said, "since 1962. 62 years, but it doesn't feel long. Time is different here. What do you do? How do you exist?" "We help." James gestured at the corridor, the hotel, the world beyond the walls. "There are many souls who pass through, many who need guidance." "Especially the children," Helen added. "When children come, and they do sometimes, they need someone who understands, someone who can help them not be afraid." Emily looked at Claire with those knowing eyes. "You're like us. You just don't remember yet." I remember arriving. I remember the train. You remember what the hotel showed you, what you were ready to see." Emily's smile was sad. "But what came before? What happened on the balcony?" Claire opened her mouth to answer. The city lights, the cold air, the strange calm, and then the memory slipped away, like water through her fingers. "That's okay." Emily reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, cold like stone that's never seen sunlight. "You'll remember when you're ready. Everyone remembers, eventually." Helen touched Claire's arm. Her hand was cool. "You're going to be good at this," she said. "The ones who carry grief are always the best at helping others. They understand what it feels like to be lost." "I don't feel good at anything right now. I feel broken." "Broken is just another word for open." James smiled. "The cracks let the light in. That's what Peter used to say." They drifted past her then, the three of them, hand in hand toward some part of the hotel Claire hadn't yet explored. She watched them go until they turned a corner and vanished. The corridor was silent, but she felt less alone than she had in years. The music. A year passed, maybe more. Claire was in the garden at dusk, watching the gates. A new arrival was due. She could feel it the way she'd learned to feel such things. A shift in the air, a weight gathering at the edge of the property. She heard it before she saw anything. Music, faint and far away, coming from somewhere in the hotel. A cello, playing something she knew by heart. 3 short notes, 2 long. The Bach suite. The sad one that sounded like the ocean. She didn't know there was a cello here. She followed the sound, up the stairs, down a corridor she didn't remember, one that seemed to flicker at the edge of her vision, there and not there, like the hotel was making room for something new. The door at the end was open. Inside, a small room, barely furnished, a window overlooking the sea, and in the center, resting on a stand as if someone had just set it down, a cello, old and beautiful. Its wood dark with age, its strings gleaming in the fading light. A bow lay across the chair beside it. Claire stood in the doorway for a long time. She hadn't played in 25 years. Her calluses were gone. Her fingers wouldn't remember the positions. It would sound terrible, clumsy and amateur, nothing like the music she used to make. She sat down anyway. The instrument was heavier than she remembered. She adjusted the end pin, positioned her knees, lifted the bow. Her left hand found the neck, her fingers curved over the strings. She drew the bow across the A string. The note that emerged was rough, uncertain, the sound of someone who had forgotten how to speak, trying to form words again. She played anyway. The first phrase came back slowly, muscle memory deeper than thought, deeper than the years of silence. 3 short notes, too long. The opening of the suite she used to play for Margaret, sitting on the floor outside her door. Her fingers found the next phrase, and the next. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished, but it was music, her music, the thing she'd killed in herself a lifetime ago, rising up through her hands like water from a spring that had never really run dry. She played, and as she played, she wept. Not from grief this time, but from something else. Recognition, return, the feeling of finally coming home. The music filled the room, spilled out into the corridor, drifted down through the hotel like smoke, like light, like grace. Downstairs in the lobby, Jessica Chen looked up from her laptop. She'd been trying to work, force of habit, even now, even here, but something had shifted in the air, a sound she couldn't quite place, music, coming from somewhere above. "What is that?" she asked. Marjorie stood behind the front desk, sorting through mail that never seemed to change. She smiled. "That's Claire." "It's beautiful." "Yes," Marjorie said. "It is." Jessica listened for a moment longer. The melody was slow and mournful, but not sad, not exactly. It sounded like the ocean, like waves pulling at the shore, always reaching, never quite holding on. Something in her chest loosened, some knot she hadn't known she was carrying. She closed her laptop. "I think I'll unpack," she said. "Maybe take a walk in the garden." "Take your time," Marjorie said. "There's no rush here." Jessica climbed the stairs toward her room. The music followed her, gentle and persistent, and she thought, without knowing why, that maybe things were going to be okay. At the iron gates, a figure stood in the gathering dark. Lou Seifert watched the hotel, his hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. The music drifted down to him, faint at this distance but clear enough. A cello, playing something old and sad and beautiful. For a moment, his expression changed. Something moved across his features, something old, something tired, something almost human. A flicker of what might have been memory, or longing, or loss. Then it was gone. He tipped an imaginary hat to no one in particular, turned, and walked into the shadows beyond the gate. The night gathered around him, the music played on. In the small room at the end of the corridor, Claire played until the last light faded from the sky. She played the Bach suite through twice, then a third time, her fingers growing surer with each repetition. When she finally set down the bow, the silence that followed was different from before. Fuller, somehow. Alive. She sat for a long moment, her hand resting on the cello's curve, feeling the wood still humming with the ghost of the music. Through the window, she could see the fixed moon rising over the ocean. The gates stood open at the edge of the property. Somewhere in the hotel, a new guest was settling in, beginning the long process of understanding. And somewhere, beyond the light, beyond the dark, beyond all the thresholds she would never cross, Margaret was living her life. Maybe she had children now. Maybe she'd found someone to play the sad songs for. Claire hoped so. She couldn't go back, couldn't apologize, couldn't bridge the silence that had calcified between them, but she could play. She could sit in this room, night after night, and send the music out into the world. Not for achievement, not for applause, just because it was who she was, who she had always been, underneath the spreadsheets and the promotions and the careful, controlled emptiness of the life she'd built. The cello waited. The hotel breathed around her, ancient and patient. And Claire, Finally, after everything began to play again. The end. That was room 6. 1-6, written by Douglas Taylor.